Hello, and thanks for watching another Sunday case study. This week I'm looking at the hand of the inventor, the genius, Nikola Tesla. And I've been wanting to read his hand for quite some time now, although this is the only real image I have or can get, and it's not all that clear. But I have deduced quite a lot of information. Now, his hand shape, his hand type, is both intellectual and analytical. It is kind of um, relatively bony in appearance. It's long, it's slender. The fingers are sort of medium to long in length, and they're also quite knotty. There's a little bit of wasting going on the second phalanx of Apollo, often seen in people with a very critical eye, nitpickers. And the bent kind of Jupiter finger here as well. Notice how it's sort of his ego's kind of crushed underneath the weight of something, and that is often overcritical um, judgment from role models when young, and that we carry with us. So he's kind of developed his own inner dialogue with himself, his own sense of supreme criticism about himself. So he's unable to take criticism from others because that makes two voices, you know, and that's a crowd really, isn't it? Who needs to have that? So had an extreme eye for detail, as well as being highly critical of his own work. And, also notice how all the fingers lean towards Saturn. Saturn is the finger of time, the inevitable, duty, societal contribution, planning, destiny. So essentially, he was constantly all of his skills and attributes, qualities relied and depended on, leaned in towards, and focused on the future, focused on what lay ahead, his what he could contribute towards society. And here's a really interesting point. Notice how, and this, this photograph he took himself in 1899 by the use of his own invention of artificial light, and it's the first photograph taken of this nature, and it's of his own hand. And when you're taking a picture of your own hand, and I know this all too well, and I'm sure some of you do as well, it's not something you're not really consciously thinking about how your hand is lying, the finger leanings, because you're too busy concentrating on keeping it still, and the use of your other hand. So actually, what happens here is a very natural occurrence of a subconscious kind of hand gesture, and it provides us with a very accurate representation of psychology, which is really useful in palmistry. And this gap here seen between Saturn and Apollo is a perfect example of someone who abstains from society. They feel isolated from the need to socialize. He was a loner, essentially, and likely works much better in this way. He distanced himself from others because he probably felt very different from others. And this is also observed by the obvious gap here seen between Mercury and Apollo as well. This is also the sign of someone who desires privacy, who cannot conform to societal requirements, obligations of bureaucracy and conventional kind of relationships. He won't be confined by the sort of rules of nonsensical traditional ties. To this person, those things don't matter or make sense. Now, the heart line, you can't see it all that clearly in this image, but it is, I'll show you here. It's just here, and it rises up onto it's the entire length of the hand. It's very, very straight. It's the entire length of the hand. So, a straight heart line is someone who is essentially by their nature quite cold and unfeeling, unkind, insensitive. But, and here's the big but, the heartline itself is very low down on the palm. So this is not someone who doesn't care. The overall capacity for feeling is there. The capacity to feel is broadened by how low down the heartline is on the hand. They care about the well-being of everybody as a whole. They don't have an ability to connect with others on a romantic level, one to one. They're But this is the other thing, the heartline, the fact that it reaches up onto Jupiter shows high idealism. So their idea of romance is, again, we're contributing all of the signs we've already seen here already. Because everything leans in towards Saturn, the future, societal contributions, value, traditional value, planning, uh, duty, it shows that his idea of romance is what he can provide and contribute to the whole, the wider picture, the bigger society as a whole. His idea of romance was providing inventions that would benefit and improve the lives of the many, not for the profit of the few. And this abstination of material wealth, uh, this abhorrent, feelings towards greed and the acquisition of wealth, and as well as that, just residing in and around, those who satiate gratify, physical pleasures and desires. To this person, all of that was something that he really shied away from, and that's just so typical of the intellectual hand. If you want to know more about what I mean by the intellectual hand type, please do have a look at my 12 hand type classification method in palmistry. You can check that out on my website. As I say, he's a combination of intellectual and analytical. Now, where we can see this further abstination of material um, acquisition and the desire for the material and worldly, earthly pleasures is seen in the way that this line develops on the first phalanx of Jupiter. And this shows a real prudence around abstaining from um, material and worldly pleasures. He was someone who found, as I say, greed abhorrent. And for this person, he didn't want to be wealthy. That wasn't an interest of his. So when people would come to him with, um, presenting money for his ideas, he felt conflicted because he required the resources to further his endeavors. But the promises of, wealth and fame, negotiating, haggling, all of these things frustrated him. And as well as this, notice how in all of the mounts of the hand, of all of the mounts, Venus sits beside the rest. It's unique in that it is lowest, it is reduced because of this loyalty line here. And it increases willpower. His willpower, his drive and determination, his motivation was immensely powerful, especially for an intellectual hand. And to back this up, the thumb as well is remarkably long, and it is as wide, it is remarkable in its width as its length. So this provides a person with a tremendous amount of ideas. His logic, his rationality was incredibly powerful. The capacity for all of these thoughts, very logical and rational thoughts, were there, but also the ability to act on them. He was motivated into action on his many ideas. So the combination here, it shows really these are the ingredients, everything I've mentioned so far, and there'll be a few more things, of a high achiever, a big achiever. The length of the thumb is often, a long thumb, one that reaches up halfway of the third phalanx of Jupiter, is someone who is a deep thinker. That reaches that far or longer is a deep thinker, but someone who has a wide thumb as well, that's a powerful thinker. Someone who is interested in revolutionizing, who has a force to make great change. And you can see here that on the lifeline at the age of 25, I would say 24, 25, there's a culmination of events here because we have here his loyalty line. There's support here seen from that loyalty line. And I'm going to explain what I believe this means later. And as well as this determination and drive, they all kind of collide and crash into the head and the lifeline, where it all meets, and it creates this star-like formation at the age of 25. And you have this rising ambition just before this time as well. So there was a real surge of energy here to make things better, to achieve, to provide himself with a platform to be recognized. And that's exactly what happened at the age of 25. He worked at a telecommunications company in Budapest and was seen his skills, his technical skills, and his vast knowledge were really enabled. He was empowered at this time and provided that platform that he required to become acknowledged as the person he felt he was. And because we're looking at the left hand, I'm going to be talking about his own feelings about himself quite a bit. And his fate line provides us with quite a bit of information on this as well. But before I do, I just want to make another last mention about his fingers. Notice the gaps here between all of the fingers. They are quite large. And in that way, they make the hand look sort of alien. And that's a very common feature of intellectual hands as well. They often have very unhealthy eating habits. And that's noted by the large spacing between the first and the fourth fingers. Whenever you have this Mercury, Apollo, Jupiter Saturn gaps that are quite large. You have or let's just say an unusual relationship with food, and you often see it in the hands of people who overeat, eat too quickly, people with bulimia, anorexia, and it's a coping mechanism for his mental health issues. His headline is quite a peculiar one because it starts up on Jupiter and it takes a very different and fascinating perspectives on its course and sort of lands down into lower Luna. So what we really have is, by all accounts, instability here, mentally speaking. But this is because of the weight of his thoughts and his vastness of his IQ. It's such, with great awareness comes this overpowering um I suppose realization, and that sets you apart from everyone else. That's a very isolating feeling when you're super aware, super intelligent. This is partly why as well he felt so distant from others, and it's just so isolated. And so these coping mechanisms of eating and OCD as well is probably a likely trait as well here. And this is also seen by this critical eye for detail as well. He was his own worst critic, a perfectionist as well. And so the combination of the signs here are kind of pointing towards the possibility, the propensity for these things. Now, the length of the headline, it's long. You can't quite see it in this image, but it is very long. And the Mercury finger is dramatically long. Again, both these things, certainly in combination with a long thumb as well, high IQ, vastly high IQ. The one thing I do want to point out about the Mercury finger is it's quite thin. It's a little bit too thin. His literal, physical, verbal voice was not strong enough. He lacked slightly in confidence, and this again stems from childhood and an overcritical mentor, guardian, parental figure had an effect on him which he carried through his life, and it's quite sad, really. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit about this loyalty line here, because as I've mentioned, the loyalty line is sometimes referred to as the Venus line or the Via Mater, the mother line. Essentially, it's one and all of these things, and it can point towards a deep and powerful, loving relationship with the opposite sex. It can point to our feelings about our mother, or where and how we place our loyalties, and sometimes that's family, and in this case, it's his work. He had really very little capacity for, as I've mentioned, one-to-one emotional connection, and that's observed by the low line, but very straight and long heart line. And the Venus mount as well is very small. The lifeline, it's kind of hard to see here, but it breaks away at 25 here, where he really claims his independence with his first kind of important work. And it wraps around Venus tightly, reducing his social network. Again, he was very isolated. His romantic relationships, his uh, capacity for involvement with the earthly pleasures are reduced as well. His familial connections, everything that is all Venus is reduced, and everything else is kind of enhanced. In particular, his aggression, actually, his motivation and drive to achieve is increased because of this. But his loyalty is in and for his work. That's what his loyalty line represents to this person. This loyalty line represents his own feelings about his work. And what's really interesting is that you can see it hitting the lifeline at the age of, I would say, 60. And I've done a little bit of research this morning, looking at his life in conjunction with what I've seen in his hand. And what's really interesting is that he was up for the Nobel Peace Prize with Edison. And they were both kind of nominated, awarded a joint Nobel Peace Prize. The West kind of showing that they were equals of each other, but neither one of them received this. I'm not sure what happened there. The following year, he became bankrupt, and then a year after that, he was awarded the Edison um, electrical medal of some sort. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but what it what I think happened here is what that is really a message of the West saying you're no longer an equal of Edison. Edison is now above you. If you're getting a medal of your, um, with your rival's name on it, that's kind of almost like a dog urinating up a lamppost. I mean, this for me solidified the West's idea of Tesla and Edison's, him beating him in that kind of that technical kind of race, because Edison stood for capitalism and profiteering and exploiting the technical inventions in a very corporatist way, benefiting the few, and joining that kind of capitalist model that was developing in the West at the time. Whereas Nikola Tesla was really non-conformist, and he went against the grain. And this is in part what really brought about his academic, his career, his career's downfall. So what this loyalty line here shows is his feelings about his relationship with his work and the death of that. That's what this shows. From the age of 60 onwards, he was heartbroken. He felt completely disheartened by his peers because there was a lack of acknowledgement over what was possible by his inventions and who he was and what he was able to provide. Essentially, he was a provider. He wanted to provide in his own way. And I think this kind of essentially through his tremendous effort, which we can see here, this is how he compensated for his inability to connect with people on a one-to-one level. This is he funneled everything. All of his flaws were made up for tremendously in other uh, skills and qualities, and he bottlenecked all of this into he put all of his eggs into one basket, and he was met with um, offers, and when these were turned down because he wanted to provide, he would rather live in poverty. And again, this is such a classic feature of the intellectual hand. He'd rather live in poverty and have everyone else reap the benefits of his efforts for the future after he was gone. He was essentially, I believe, and this is heavily debated, from what I've seen in his hands, I believe there was betrayal and a great sense of loss here. And it's attached to this idea of abstaining from material wealth. There is a horizontal line that can be seen uh, reaching right across from Mercury, almost as though a relationship with work, that is betraying and creating an obstacle towards um, progression. productivity, moving forward, and it's creating a hurdle within his kind of emotional realm as well. And a horizontal line seen like this is something of a betrayal, and again, it's connected to his inability to um, connect with his own. It's connected to his inability to accept what isn't necessary. Essentially, I believe he was offered a vast amount of money for his intellectual property. And when this was declined, because he likely knew that this information would be used to profit over the many, to benefit the few, he sat in his rags in his apartment, completely in poverty, and said, "No, you're all right, mate. I think I'll pass on that." What he may have failed to realize is that this was not an offer at all. And I believe he was murdered because of this. The United States government, the moment he died, took all the information out of his apartment, out of his safe, in the interest of national security. It's such a convenient argument every time. And now that information and has always, remained in their hands anyway. So they were always going to get what they wanted anyway. His fate line is quite interesting because it comes from both sort of hard to see it from Pluto here and from Venus. It's attached to essentially it's attached to his lifeline, which wraps around and underneath Venus. So you kind of have it becomes one with the lifeline. You kind of have something of a forking effect here, but it is also coming from Pluto. Now that is, if you've seen it in many of my other videos, you'll know that this is said to be someone who has come back from a past life with unfinished business. This is someone with a great sense of purpose and almost urgency in about how they have to utilize their time on this world. And the straightness of this fate line as well, in the left hand in particular, shows for someone so rational and logical that he has a feeling of some sort of predestiny, that he feels, fated. He has a strong sense of purpose uh, that he has to fulfill a role in this life. That's what this hand is showing me, and I'm taking no notice of this little black dot here because it's a very old picture. So that about wraps it up. There we have it. That's pretty much all I'm going to say because I know it's an unusual one this time around because the image quality is just so poor. But I feel like I have deduced quite a bit of information here. And, I've always kind of roughly known his story, but now I feel like I'm much more connected with him as a person. And I just feel so sorry for him, and the way things turned out. And it really is just the classic story of nice guys finish last. There's a sense of naivety, and I suspect that he was autistic, or at least on the spectrum. This inability to understand and connect with people on a social level, but to make up for that, the vastness of his tremendous intelligence. It's quite a classic sort of trait seen with those with ASD. So it's really sad. Um, but actually, the things that he did achieve, that he was able to achieve in the first place, are still quite incredible. And I think the more that people talk about Nikola Tesla, the more um, his story should and could be recognized, because especially in the West, the victors write the history books, and Edison is always kind of in pole position, whereas actually it's to me it's kind of obvious that Tesla was one of the most incredible inventors the world has ever known, probably the most. um, Edison was a capitalist. And that really shows how you know, if you're placing the importance of material gain, that shows how you're putting the importance of the temporary, the here and now, this life, uh, above what's possible. Um, and that really is the hallmark of an inventor. What if? What happens if I do this? And that's really what his hand says on many levels. So I just found I always have found his hand really interesting, but I've always sort of thought, oh, it's just a bit too rubbish of an image. But there we go. Let me know what your thoughts are on this palm reading, and let me know who you'd like me to read the hands of next Sunday. If you have clear images of anyone that you'd like me to read the hands of, celebrity-wise, please do send them my way. It's particularly difficult to find clear images. So thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.